Good evening, family and friends, and welcome to another broadcast of Let's Talk About It. We are so excited to have you sharing with us this evening, and we want you to do a few things. One, we want you to reach out to your family and your friends and ask them to join you. You may want to start a watch party this evening. This is going to be a special edition of our show. The reason being is that we, as you know, on this past Monday had our Town Hall 2 uh, meeting. Had very good information that was shared, a very good moderator, and so many people were not able to view it that wanted to. And so, what we're going to do this evening is we're going to rebroadcast it uh, right here on our show because we believe that the conversation need to be had. Police reform is so important, and I'm going to share with you a video clip from yesterday. Which highlights the fact that even here in Baltimore County, they had a vote. Well, the vote was tabled, from my understanding, on a bill that was introduced by Councilman Jones on police reform. And the bottom line is the vote did not go through. And it's sad. It's sad that uh, our elected officials, some of them, not all of them, some of them, do not feel the need of um, addressing this issue. Uh, and I think that we really need to take a look at it and examine it, continue the conversation, and hold our elected officials accountable. We need to bring them into accountability as it relates to the things that the community needs. And so we have a special edition of our show this evening. It's going to go a little longer than what it normally goes, and so you have time to get your popcorn, get in your favorite chair, get your favorite beverage, sit back, enjoy the show because we're going to show the uh, the town hall. We'll show the town hall from this past Monday evening. But before that, I want to share with you a clip, a video clip from the news media that shared about what transpired on this past yesterday, I believe it was. So listen, watch this.
The push for reforms to improve the Baltimore County Police Department. We told you yesterday that the County Council voted to kill a bill proposing some sweeping changes. WMAR2 News' Ray Strickland reached out to people on both sides of the issue, including County Councilman Julian Jones.
Frankly, Kelly, he called it a disgrace that his colleagues decided to vote against his police reform bill. He said that this was something that was going to help both police and Baltimore County citizens, but people who opposed it believe the bill went too far.
Baltimore County Councilman Julian Jones says the council's vote to kill his bill on police reform was disappointing, especially since he says the bill received more support from the public than he's ever seen since he's been on the council.
We had 180 people listening. We had people standing in line to speak for over 6 hours just to give their 2-minute testimony.
Jones's bill would have implemented a number of reforms, such as banning chokeholds, requiring officers to intervene when another officer uses excessive force, prohibiting the police department from hiring an officer who was accused of police misconduct, and more de-escalation training.
Would have made it safer for the police officers as well as safer for the citizens.
But on Monday, in a 4-3 vote, the county council voted to postpone the bill. Jones says some members argued there were too many amendments that would have changed the heart of the bill, but he disagrees.
It became clear to me that there were people that had no interest in the bill passing in any shape, form, or fashion.
One of the bill's opponents was David Rose, who is the president of Baltimore County's Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 4. He sent us a statement that reads in part, quote, "This bill made what should be violations of policy, violations of criminal law. Also, many of the provisions in the bill are already currently Baltimore County Police Department policy," end quote.
The issue is not going anywhere, and neither are the people who are supportive of this issue.
Jones says he will continue to fight for police reform and plans on introducing more legislation.
What we're going to do is break the bill up into individual bills. That way we can take on every item by itself.
And it is worth mentioning that Baltimore County announced a series of reforms back in June, some of which were included in this bill. Now, we did reach out to the 4 council members who voted against Councilman Jones's police reform bill, but we did not hear back. Reporting outside of Baltimore County Police Headquarters, Ray Strickland, WMAR.
The push for reforms to improve the.
All right, so there you have it. It's interesting that the persons who voted against this bill did not respond to the request of the reporters, and that's not nothing new. Even the president of the police union that spoke out or that sent the letter did not respond to our request when we invited him to be a part of the first town hall. So, for some reason, certain people seem to think that if we don't talk about it or if we don't address it, that it'll go away. And they're sadly mistaken. We have lives that are at stake. We have individuals that have been unfairly treated. And here is the thing, and what I keep trying to share with people is this: what we are attempting to do, the changes that we are attempting to make, just as much as they are for us, but more importantly, they're for our descendants, they're for our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, our great great grandchildren. And when the history books are written and they read what happened during these times, they're going to ask the question, why did my foreparents, why did they think this way? Why did they not feel the need to connect to individuals? Why is it that they didn't feel that it was important enough to vote and to make changes? And so we're going to continue to speak to these issues. We're going to continue to sound the alarm, but we must also remind you of the voter registration. You cannot make effective changes if you are not in the position to do so. And so, as we have been sharing, if you are not registered to vote, you need to get registered. The last day to register to be able to vote in the general election is October the 19th. Your registration form, registration has to be in by the end of the day, postmarked by the end of the day. You can go to USA.gov and you can register to vote right there online. We know that the pandemic is still moving about and folk are still being challenged by what's going on with that. And certainly we want you to be safe. We want you to be healthy. We want your family to be safe. Listen, there is a big conversation going on right now about whether or not children should be allowed back in school. That is a conversation that needs to be had. Reason being, the teachers are concerned, parents are concerned, school officials are concerned. And so we need to be safe. We need to take the necessary precautions. We need to make sure that we do everything that is appropriate. Please, ma'am, please, sir, make sure that you wear your mask. Wear your mask at all costs. It is for your protection. And when you're able to, wear your gloves. Make sure when you enter into a facility, a building, or whatever, go straight to the restroom. Wash your hands. Do the appropriate things that are necessary that you might remain safe and your family would remain safe so that we don't fall victim of some of the things that are happening and being caught up in these viruses. Listen, we've got to take care of ourselves. We have to be careful. We have to be vigilant. We have to pay attention. And it is important for us to do so. But just as important as that, we need to make sure that we're in the position so that we can vote. And so, you know, that is one of our platforms, voter registration. And so, please, ma'am, please, sir, do what is necessary so that come for the general election. Listen, they are already hyped up about this election and the fraud and the trickery that's going to take place, even with the mail-in votes. Listen. We have got to do everything we can to make sure that our voices are heard and that we remain vigilant. Listen, it not only is our lives on the line, but again, the lives of our descendants. We have to put some things in place to protect them. And if we don't do it, then we are going to be held accountable. And we won't have anybody else to blame but ourselves. And so please, ma'am, please, sir, please do what you can. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure your family members, your friends, your coworkers, ask them, are you registered to vote? And tell them I will help you. I can get you the link that you can register to vote without even having to leave the confinements of your home. All right. So please, ma'am, and please, sir, please do that. And as always, if at any time you need to reach us, you can reach us certainly by our email, which is yes, let's talk about it, the number one at gmail.com. That's yes, let's talk about it, the number one at gmail.com. And so, again, we ask that you would reach out to your family and friends and coworkers and ask them to like, for those who are on Facebook, to like our page and then share it. And then you can send comments. You send comments, acknowledge the disclaimer there, and when you send your comments, we will see them. They will come directly to us right here in the studio. And so, as we said, tonight is going to be a special show because we're going to rebroadcast, re-air the town hall that was held on this past Monday, where we had an awesome panel once again. We had Attorney Joey Jackson was our moderator. We had persons from the North, Major Hughes from the Norfolk, Newport News, Virginia Police Sheriff's Department. We had State's Attorney Bradboy from the PG County. We had Major Captain from PG County. And so we had we had NAACP Anthony Fugit from Baltimore County, NAACP. We also had Sergeant um, Anthony from the Blue Guardians, president of the Blue Guardians. So we had an outstanding panel once again for this town hall too, and we thought that the information that was shared was so important that we thought that we would air it again. And so tonight, as we've said, this is going to be a special show, and so we're going to do that. We're going to do that tonight, and we want you to sit back, enjoy and here, take some notes of what transpired during this town hall. And what you'll find, there was some very, very interesting questions that was asked. There was some good information that was shared. And I think it's important. It's important for us to understand exactly what's going on. And so that's why we're taking the time this evening with this special broadcast to rebroadcast the town hall on police reform that just happened on this past Monday. And so we want you to be aware of it. We want to share it with you. We want you to get all of the information. So sit back and enjoy.
To sustain meaningful reform. And in the event that the federal government is not going to do it or Congress can't do it, then what can we do at the local level in order to do something? We are seeing protests throughout this country, Reverend Mason, as you know. And those protests, to my delight, are looking so much more diverse than ever before. To your point, Reverend Mason, about enough being enough, I think that now is the time that people are fed up. And not only are people being fed up and therefore saying we're going to protest for protesting's sake, but I think people want meaningful reform. People want meaningful change. People want to know that the localities are out here and people are making a difference. And so in these challenging and trying times, we have a choice. And that choice is only but one, and that is to succeed. And that is to get to the issue of how we can move this narrative and reform something in a meaningful way so that we could bridge the gap between law enforcement and communities. And so we can ultimately come to the conclusion and understanding that yes, police need communities, communities need police, but police, of course, in doing their job, and a dangerous job it is, have to have some respect and understanding for what's happening within those communities so we can have policing that is more effective, more efficient, and so that people feel safe, they feel free, and they feel that they've reached the point where they can trust and partner with their officers. And so that's what this is all about. And so in getting right into it, Reverend, and again, I thank you. I want to just again introduce the panel that you've introduced, and they certainly need no introduction. These people are titans in communities or titans throughout the country. But let me just introduce again so that everybody is fully aware of who we have. And following my introduction, I'm going to ask everyone a very important question. And that is to all of you, before I get to the introductions, what do you see as the major issue involving police and communities? And what can we do in order to get to that? really managing and do manage these crises, but also have to be responsible for implementing these reforms. And so again, to Major Katie Goodwin, we appreciate you. Certainly look forward to your comments tonight. And more importantly, look forward to your issues and your comments as it relates to reform and what we can do to move this forward. And then, of course, we have Sergeant Anthony Russell. He's the president of the Blue Guardians. Sergeant Russell, just in terms of your knowledge of the streets and the way in which you come up, through the ranks in order to, just be the beat in the ears of the community, knowing what's going on, knowing what happens in law enforcement, knowing what happens in communities and what we need to do in order to get on the same page, and certainly what we need to do to implement these meaningful and sustainable reforms that are fair to the members in blue, but that are fair to members in the community as well. And finally, last, certainly by no means least, Mr. Anthony Fugette. He's the president of the Baltimore County branch NAACP. And, it's not lost on anyone what's been happening with police and communities. And if I mentioned all the names, particularly of African-American men and women, I should say, certainly Breonna Taylor comes first to mind. So many more I could mention. It's not lost on anyone how people of color are just really singled out and in a very negative way. I mean, just one after the other. George Floyd, of course, being such a picture of what we're seeing now, but certainly it's the vision and the leadership of the NAACP to brand together, to say that enough is enough, and not only to say it, but to create action and do something about it. And so certainly your role, Mr. Fugette, is just an extreme one, and it's of such extreme importance. And so with that said, again, you see the panel, you see the talent, you see the just tremendous wisdom and experience, but more importantly, we're here tonight to have a discussion to advance the issue, to move the issue forward with regard to what we can do. And as I mentioned at the outset, when I was introducing our great state attorney, Prince George's County, Aisha Braveboy, the issue really, in my view, to get this started is what is the critical issue? And what could we do, Ms. County Attorney, in order to have a positive effect on this reform issue? What reform could we implement today in order to get this in a different place, in order to have reform in a way that communities know and trust and respect officers? And certainly we could just be in a better place moving forward. And with that said, I would leave it to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I don't pretend to know all of the answers, but I do have a perspective that I think is very important. And Mr. Jackson, thank you so much for the introduction. I have watched you numerous occasions and have been impressed. I'm very humbled to be on this panel with you as the moderator. But what I will say is that recently I wrote an article for the Afro entitled, police, looking at police basically and prosecutors more as problem solvers and not simply law enforcers. And I think that's really critical because ultimately, our job is to keep the community safe. And so if crime exists, that means that there are people who are unsafe in our communities. So there are people who are being taken advantage of in our communities. So our goal has to be to work as problem solvers along with our communities to begin to address some of the underlying issues that cause crime in our communities. And if we really began to look at ourselves as problem solvers, if we really began to look at issues that are impacting people who are committing those crimes and look at ourselves as vessels to really create change for them. And I'll give you an example. We had to prosecute, my very first prosecution of an officer was an officer who beat a homeless man who was handcuffed in the front seat of his cruiser. The homeless man had committed a 4th-degree burglary, which is breaking into an unoccupied space. And so he was a defendant, or a suspect at the time. He was going to be transported to the jail. And he was facing, charges. Well, after he was beaten by the police officer, obviously he was still charged. We did an investigation, determined that the officer exceeded his authorized use of force, and we ended up charging the officer and dismissing the case against the homeless man. But when I looked at it, I said, you know what? He did commit a crime, but he's homeless. You know, wonder if the officers who responded, instead of thinking of him as a suspect, as someone who they needed to arrest and take to jail, wonder if he gave them more tools, more options to treat that person like someone who needed help. Like they are part of our community and they need help because they broken into this place, not because they're a horrible person, but because they needed somewhere, you know, warm to sleep at night. And I'm not saying everyone who commits an offense has a sob story, such as this particular person, but the reality is most people who are committing offenses in our community are committing what's considered misdemeanor offenses. They're low-level offenses committed by people who have needs that have gone unmet, whether they're mental health needs, substance abuse needs, people who have faced trauma in their lives and are reacting as a result of that trauma. When we begin to see them as people and not simply defendants or suspects, then the way that we respond to them will change. I believe if we go back, and I know that Officer Goodwin could probably also agree with this, if we go back to what's considered the 9 principles of policing that Sir Robert Peel mentioned so long ago, that police, and I'll just give you one, principle number 7, police at all times should maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. The police being the only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent upon every citizen in the interest of community welfare and existence. If the police can really look at themselves as part of our community and not just simply law enforcement, if they look at us as neighbors, and prosecutors too, that's why I tell my prosecutors all the time, these are our community members. Some of them, yes, we have to prosecute, but others we have to help. And if we can begin to look at ourselves as problem solvers or helping solve problems in our community and not just focusing on punishment, then I think our communities will be a lot safer, and I think we will have more respect from the public who we serve.
Yeah, you know, I could not agree more with that. I think they're very important. And, you know, just in keeping with that, and I'll turn, of course, to Anthony Puget at this point, president of the Baltimore County branch NAACP. But I guess what I'd ask you in keeping, you know, with that great comments, police are problem solvers, but it seems that they are more of the problem lately than they are the solution. And another thing that was stated that was so important is just not seeing people as defendants or suspects, but seeing them as human beings, and sisters and mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and cousins. And, you know, there's so much, it seems, particularly, you know, there's many examples I could use, but, you know, the whole dehumanization of George Floyd, why do that? And we can talk about driving while black, sitting in a Starbucks while black, walking while black, talking while black, whatever it is. You know, what can we do about that, Mr. Puget, in order to get potentially, again, in your view, the most important priorities? You know, I certainly love to hear from you. I think in keeping it, people not being seen as people, it's in people of color being seen as less than or something else. What needs to happen in order to get that perspective out? And as our state attorney said, have police say, look, this is a member of my community because I'm in this community. What do we do about that?
So that, you know, that you raise a very interesting question. What do we do? And what we do as a NAACP is we are looking at the institution called the police department, and we're looking at the practices of the police department because it boils down to how officers are trained.
mean, if they're not respecting people, then they're probably not trained to do that. And basically what they're doing is that they don't know how to de-escalate situations. They escalate situations. And what we think needs to happen is that training is something that needs to take place. And that the other thing that I think that you have to eliminate in an organization is the, if you would, institutional racism, if you would, or bias that is built into the department. And when you're working with a department like Baltimore County Police Department, I mean, most people don't understand that when you become chief of the department, you inherit an organization. That everyone in the organization starts from the beginning and goes up to the colonel, which is the highest ranking level, and they're all internal organizations. It's not like you have a luxury of bringing in your people to run the organization. So we're in a situation in Baltimore County where we have to work with, if you would, trying to change people who have been discriminatory for a number of years. If you look at what we've been involved in, we've been involved in this for quite some time. This is no new news for the Baltimore County branch of the NAACP. We have seen issues that have happened before. I mean, we've had African-American officers to reach out to us and say that, for example, that they're being discriminated against internally in the organization. You know, and as a matter of fact, way back a number of years ago, we took this to the Department of Justice to say, hey, we have to do something. And at that time, the Department of Justice told the NAACP that we needed names of officers. And the officers weren't prepared to, if you would, sign on the dotted line because they're in a profession where people carry guns. So the net of it is, and I know everybody needs to speak on this, is that you have to look at the institution called the police department and how it operates. And what can you do to change how it looks at the community that it serves? And until you fix the internal organization and you have that resolved, there's no way that you can be respected in the community because you don't have but you're not even taking care of African Americans in the department. So how can you take care of African Americans in the community? And that's what we're trying to get to.
Without question, and as I turn to you, Anthony Russell, and certainly we know he's the sergeant and the president of the Blue Guardians. But as I turn to you, I just want to talk about just a couple of things that Mr. Fuget said, which are very important. You know, we have this issue of institutional racism. We have the issue of training. Certainly it's important. The issue of de-escalation, all that's important. But I just often wonder, is it more than that, right? You know, training absolutely, I think, can solve a lot. And potentially in that training, we can talk about escalation, what they should do. But what about if you have a mindset from the very beginning, and that mindset is one that, and I'm not suggesting all officers get up and they look to hurt people or anything else. And by the way, I just want to be clear that, you know, officers put themselves online and they bus every day and twice on Sunday. My father, may he rest in peace, was a police officer. But we've had some serious problems now, and we have to call what we see, and we can't sugarcoat this conversation. And I'm just wondering, as I turn to you, Sergeant Russell, is it more than training? Is it more than de-escalation? Is it about who we're hiring? Is it about the communities that they come from? Is it potentially the communities that officers are policing? Does it maybe the police department not being as reflective of the communities they're serving? Perhaps people on the force maybe not being, or they shouldn't be there to begin with. And so what's your view as to what we do to stop what's happening, to really eradicate the bad seeds and the bad apples so that, you know, as Reverend Mason said, enough really does become enough?
Well, first of all, it's a great question. And I think that this goes back to 1619. I think it goes back that far. And I think it goes back to the mutual respect that the police should have for the community. And when you really break down the things that you just talked about, hiring is the start of that situation. We have to ensure that the people who come on the job have a respect for people that don't look like them, or a respect for people that they did not grow up with or interact with. this is a major situation because at certain points, you have to force people to examine themselves. And when they examine themselves, they have to understand and uncover some flaws that are being uncovered on an international level at this point. George Floyd woke up the world. We all were witnesses to a murder. We all saw what happened. And we, as the Black community, we've been talking about this for a long time. However, because this was filmed, people were able to see the things that we have been talking about. It was filmed and people could review it. So the way in which the officer was callously putting his knee on his neck, that's the root cause of that situation. It goes back to the mutual respect of people who are minorities. And if we don't respect a person, we don't listen to a person. We don't dialogue with a person because we don't look at them as someone that is worthy of having a dialogue with us. So again, part of it is understanding that the founding fathers had flaws, which a lot of people don't want to digest. But once you uncover that, once you uncover the lack of respect, and then you transition that to the hiring process, and you understand that police are in a very powerful position. People don't want to give up that power. They don't want to share that power. But at the end of the day, the public has to retake that power and change the paradigm.
Without question, and you know, I certainly get that, and I think so important to what you said. So many things were important what you said, but this whole issue of self-examination, I think, is really important. And I think we're at the point where we really have to have police look to the issue of self-examination and see what is it that, you know, they can do in order to assist in bridging divide and in seeing whether they're treating people in communities fairly, whether they're treating them justly, whether they're treating them with that respect. And so I'm just wondering, and moving forward, and I'll turn to you, our police commander, and that's, of course, Major Katie Goodwin. You know, what can we do? I mean, I know your job is a very difficult one, overseeing a number of people who, you know, certainly are working hard every day to keep communities safe. Now it's a very difficult time, certainly for law enforcement. But what can we do in terms of the self-examination that Anthony Russell was speaking about in order to help police, help communities, help themselves, and help this whole dialogue about getting on the same page about, yes, I will respect what you do if you respect me. Yes, I understand what you do, just understand me. Yes, I get that you have a difficult job, understand potentially I have a difficult life. So what can we do there, you know, Commander, looking to you, Katie Goodwin, in order to do something about this and to sort of get police vested in this issue of reform?
Yeah, I have to agree with everything that's already been said, and you're absolutely right. These are challenging times. It's going to require healthy and continuous dialogue with all of our community members. We've got to realize that our community needs to know what we are doing and how we operate more now than ever. So creating that understanding of how police officers respond to a situation, and more importantly, why they respond the way they do, that's going to help with that building of the trust. And I couldn't agree more with what everyone's saying about the human element of it and that respect. Citizens have got to start seeing our police officers in a completely different light, especially the youth, the juveniles in our communities. They can't see us just coming into their neighborhoods and arresting their family members and their friends. They got to start seeing officers as compassionate human beings that are there to help them, to make their situation better. I tell our officers all the time, the law enforcement role that you play is a very minute role. As a very minute role for police officers nowadays. We are in the middle of all the social issues that are surrounding us, with hopelessness, with mental health, with overdoses. They're human problems, and we have to treat them compassionately. So we're more than just enforcing laws nowadays, and that's what we really have to stress to our police officers. And that absolutely comes back to the training that we're giving our officers, because we're having to
handle these type of social issues in the world right now. So, we talk about the trust, and that's where it all comes down to. It's up to us, the police officers, to continue to earn the trust of those we serve and to rebuild those bridges with all of our community members. And as citizens, they should always feel assured that the police departments do not and will not accept anything less than respect for all lives, including the ones we arrest. I tell my officers all the time that even when we arrest those individuals, you have to imagine yourself arresting someone that you love, whether it's your mother, your father, your wife, your husband, your mother, whoever it is. You treat everybody with respect, even the ones that we arrest. I mean, sometimes I go by the platinum rule, which is more than the golden rule, and that is that you treat people better than they think they should be treated. But it absolutely comes down to respect. And I think police officers and police leaders in general need to all understand and admit that policing in general needs improvement. We always need to improve. We should never have been doing policing like we did 20, 25 years ago. There's always room for improvement. There's always room for looking over our policies and make sure that we're doing best practices. And no one should be denying that ever. I think if you ask most people why they want to be a police officer, their answer should be because they want to make a difference. And every community in our state, in our country, deserves good cops that are out there to protect and serve.
I have to tell you, Commander, I really appreciate your philosophy, and I think I'm going to start using that, the platinum rule. It's not the golden rule, it's the platinum rule. And the platinum rule really, because now you're not only treating a person as a person, but you're really empathizing and treating them with someone who you really not only respect, but you think deserves even more respect. And I think that's something that we really have to transition and translate to officers. And I think if we were able to do that, and certainly it starts at a place where you come from, right, Major Katie Goodwin, and that is at the top, right? It comes from the culture of any organization to let people know that when you're out on the beat, yes, there are times you have to engage in unpleasantness as an officer. It's the nature of the job. But just, one response begets another response. And I think if there's professionalism, courtesy, and concern, I think potentially that courtesy, professionalism, and concern would really boomerang back, right? And the officer would be treated in kind. Yes. And so I wanted, if I could, and I didn't know, Anthony Russell, did you have your hand up, or did you?
No. I had lost your vision.
Oh, okay. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, all right. Because I certainly, if you had something important, I wanted to honor that and get to you. But I wanted to stick with you if I could, Commander, because I want to turn to a lightning rod issue. And, Reverend Mason, before I ask the Commander the question, I do have a question for you. And just so that you know, Commander, what I wanted to do is to turn to the issue, the lightning rod issue of defunding the police. And the reason I wanted to turn to that, which I will momentarily because I just wanted to ask the Reverend a question. It's because it means different things to different people. And in your discussion, right, just now, you were talking about how police are involved in so many things, including social services. We expect so much of the police. And I'm wondering what, if anything, we might want to alter or change or shift or think in different ways as to what they should be doing and shouldn't be. And I'll get back to you on that momentarily. But Reverend, I just wanted to ask you before I went back to the Commander, and I wanted to ask you about the role of the clergy in all this. Places of worship and churches are so important in our communities. We worship on Sundays, and, there's so many people we look up to who are members of the cloth, and just people who are members of a congregation. And they're so influential politically, they're influential socially. What do you see, Reverend Mason, as the role of the church in this whole reform issue?
Well, the church has a very integral part. We are interwoven in the community. One of the things that I share with fellow pastors and clergy is when they ask me to come and help them with particular aspects of their church, one of the first questions I ask them is, are you a part of the community association? That's one of the first questions I ask them. And I say, if you're not a part of the community association, you're a part of the problem of the community. Think of how the community sees the congregants. First of all, most of the congregants in most churches don't live in the community. So they come into the community, they take up the parking spaces of the people that live in the community. And let's be real, some of them get out of their cars. They don't even speak to members of the community on the steps. They go into worship, they come out, get in their cars, and they drive away. And so I always challenge clergy, listen, get involved in the community. Find out what it is the community need from you. See, one of the problems that we have is we have this mindset that we know it all. All of a sudden, we've been given a Bible and a cross, and some will even pick up a hymn book, and we feel that we know it all. Listen, it is impossible for a husband to be good and kind to his wife if he doesn't know what it is his wife wants. She may be allergic to chocolate, and every Thanksgiving you bring her a box of chocolate, and you wonder why she doesn't eat it. She accepts it the first couple of years because she doesn't want to seem not appreciative. But after some time, the conversation needs to be had. Listen, the chocolate, is it something that you like? What I do for my wife, I know the kind of chocolate that she likes. I go to the candy store. I don't buy ready-made boxes off the shelf. I go to the candy store and I pick out what I want to go in her box because I know what she likes. The same thing works with other things. If we find out what the community say they need, then certainly we can do what we can to help address that need. Now, the church may not have all of the answers or all of the resources, but at least if I know what you need, then I can then reach out to other organizations and associations that I can partner with to get what is needed.
Can I say one thing about that?
Please.
If I could give any police department advice, I would say it is vital that you partner up with your clergy. We did that in a lot of our communities that we didn't have the trust from those community members. So telling your officers to go in there and tell these people that already don't trust police, hey, trust us, we're the good guys. That will only go so far, and post rates won't go far at all. When we partnered up with some of our Black clergy members and went into those same communities and just walked beside them as they talked to the communities, kept our mouths shut, but just sat there and listened. Over time, when they kept seeing our officers and our executive leaders standing next to these clergies, talking to these individuals, they started associating, okay, because people trust the clergy, right? So that's kind of that bridging that gap between law enforcement and communities, is using them to open that door of dialogue and conversation. And slowly over time, when they start seeing us walking hand in hand with the clergy and they start talking to the clergy, it starts transitioning to them talking to police officers now. And it starts there. And I can't tell you how vital that's been for our police department to build that relationship and bring them in to helping us bridge that gap, and it's worked.
That's amazing, and something that's so important. You know, and I want to stick with you. You know, Major Goodwin, you were last, right? And you know, and now we're right on top of it with you. And so bear with me. You know, because when we talk about this, the funding issue, which I wanted to transition into, it's such a lightning rod issue, right? And many people potentially believe the funding means we shouldn't have police. You know, it may mean to people, police, you know, the police, we should get rid of them. I tend to look at it as an issue more of the redistribution of resources potentially. And I know police have a lot to do as it relates to everything. You know, respond to all types of calls, traffic accidents, interacting with the homeless, interacting with schools. What, if anything, do you see, you know, again, if anything, in terms of this whole funding issue? Is there a time and a place to talk about potentially the redistribution of resources? Potentially there should be other people maybe taking care of the homeless population. Potentially there should be other people dealing with you know, issues concerning minor car accidents and fender benders. Potentially there should be other people dealing with those who have drug or alcohol problems. And so what, if any, role do you see on the funding issue? If you had a comment on it, you know, is that something we should be debating and speaking about? what, if we do debate and speak about it, should the funding look like, meaning the reallocation and the redistribution of resources?
Yeah, I think when people threw that word out in the very beginning, defund, that's what caused that negative stigma. The word defund, people are like, abolish the police department? How can you do that? And that's not what the intent was when people started talking about defunding. It's exactly what you said. Police officers have been tasked with more than just enforcing the laws, as I've already said. We're dealing with all the social issues that are out there. And I think what's happened over time, when it started with the overdoses of heroin and opioids, and then it became homelessness, and then it's the mental health crisis right now. Police departments are the only service out there that are 24/7. So I think that's kind of how we got tasked with all these issues and being the problem solvers, because someone needs help, they call 911. And no matter what the issue is or the problem is we're going to respond, because that's our job, is to help somebody, especially someone that's in need or someone's in crisis. So I think we've inherited a lot of that, being the problem solvers for those issues. I don't think defunding is a bad word, as long as it's explaining what you're meaning to do with those fundings. If it means transferring all the money that we use to help with mental health, to help with the opioid addiction, to give it to those right resources in county governments, state governments, federal governments, then absolutely we should be looking at it. But I think you have to do it smart, and you have to do it making sure that those agencies have the right resources and enough resources, because people don't go into crisis Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. They're in crisis at 3 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday. So I think it has a lot more thought-provoking that you have to look into that. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we should probably be looking into it more. Just like with anything else, any other issues we have out there, not one agency can solve all the problems. It takes a collaborative effort. A lot of issues that we deal with, it shouldn't just be a police problem. It shouldn't just be a fire department problem. It shouldn't just be a Department of Health problem, a Department of Aging, DSS. We all have got to work together. And that means maybe dividing that funding up so that these other agencies that aren't a 24/7 service, and that's what it takes, to maybe we need to look at it. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the first time the word was thrown out there, it got that negative stigma because people are thinking, oh my gosh, we're not going to hire police anymore, or we're doing away with police officers. I don't think that was anybody's intent when that word was used, but I think it would be healthy and smart to really look at that and look at the funding and where it should be lying.
Without question. So as we have that discussion, I have to go back to our state's attorney, because the commander mentioned problem solvers, and you started us off, Aisha, where you addressed your problem solving and looking at police as the problem solvers who are out there. And so in sticking with this issue of the funding, what in your view, how should we be approaching this issue? Should we be giving credence to this issue of the funding, and what can we look at as potentially ways to redistribute not only resources, but the allocation of jobs and assignments and responsibilities to other members of the public?
Absolutely. And I would agree with Commander Goodwin. I mean, we have to really begin to address problems in our community in a more holistic way and in a more effective way. So there are often times when police are called to respond because someone is having a mental health crisis, right? So a family member typically will call the police to respond to what is probably an issue that should be responded to by clinicians, people who are trained in mental health disorders and understand how to de-escalate someone who's facing that disorder. But the only people getting paid overtime, the only people who are out there are the police. They're the ones who you call 911, and they're the ones who respond. I think if police respond to scenes like that, which they should, to ensure that there is safety, there should also be clinicians that can also respond to a scene like that are also supported by the government, so that those individuals actually go to that scene and help to de-escalate those situations. So we can't expect police to be the psychologists, psychiatrists, and everything else that people have gone to school for years to master. We can't expect the police, just because they have a badge of honor and authority, to know everything. But what we can expect our police to do is assess the situation and determine if they need help. Just like when they need backup and they call for a partner, they may need backup, and they may need someone who can provide medical support to come out to help de-escalate the situation. And so I think the whole around defunding really isn't about defunding. It's about putting our funds in the appropriate places so that we can have the appropriate response to our communities for their needs. I'm dealing with an issue right now where we have a basically what amounted at this point. There's a individual who ended up dead as a result of police responding to a mental health crisis, and then that situation escalated to a point where there was lethal force used. Could it have been different if we had a mobile mental health crisis team that also responded when police respond to these incidents? And so I'm not making any excuses for law enforcement. Certainly we have to hold them to, a certain standard. But you also have to understand that there are a lot of situations that they don't create, that they are asked to respond to by the public, by family members, by victims, where they enter into very dangerous situations and situations that are not easy to contain. And when that happens, police, I think, oftentimes feel very vulnerable because on the one hand, they've been called to respond, so they have to respond. But on the other hand, they understand that situation is likely going to escalate, and they don't necessarily have the tools to de-escalate certain types of situations. So I think what we have to do is talk with our police and ask them also, what do you need? I mean, we often criticize police on how they react to situations, but we don't also ask them, what are the resources you need? What do you need government to do? You can't and should not do everything. What else do we need to be providing as a government so that you can do your job effectively in a way that the public can accept? Because the public does not want to accept when there is a situation where a police officer uses lethal force. And guess what? Police officers don't want to be in that situation either. I think the officer would agree with me when I say that. Nobody wants that situation. But when you don't put resources into those things that can assist our communities, like mental health, like substance abuse, when you disinvest, which we have done historically, especially in communities of color, we disinvest in those things that we don't like. We don't like group homes. We don't like halfway houses. We don't like certain things in our communities. But if those are things that are needed in order to support people in our communities, yet we don't want them, what ends up happening is the police get called. The police respond, and they respond to very sometimes unsettling and very dangerous situations. Not that I won't hold them responsible, and I do, for doing their job and doing it professionally. But I think that's not enough because that means something happened. So we're trying to prevent that something from happening. And how can we do that? And I think those conversations need to include the police because they really do. They are first responders. They really do understand the social ills plaguing our communities also. They can be a part, to me, of that solution.
Yeah, that's so well said. And so since it is so well said, I have to say to you, State's Attorney, I am going to take your question. I'm going to provide it to Major David Hughes. What do you need, right? If the governor came and met with you tomorrow and said, what do you need? We're having this discussion about defunding. Are there things, David Hughes, not that we're looking to cut anything in police or anything else, but distributed that can help you do your job better, that your officers are complaining about? The people are saying, listen, I don't want to deal with, drug issues. I'm not equipped to deal with them. I don't want to deal with mental health issues. I'm not equipped to deal with them. I don't want to deal, with traffic under accidents. Someone else can. What would you tell the governor? What do you need?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that if we're dealing with it at the point when it's occurring, it's too late. We've already, the horse is already out of the barn, and we're trying to get the horse back into the barn. We have to start at the beginning. Just like Mr. Russell said earlier, it's the very beginning of the career. It's the folks that we have out there. Who are we hiring? What type of training do they have? What type of education do they have? What type of background? And I'll even go one further than Mr. Russell. In order to be respected by the community, the police officer has to feel like he is a part of the community. If he does not have a connection to that community, he will never gain the respect of that community. He has to have that connection. I started my career with the Norfolk Police Department 33 years ago today, August 3rd of 1987. I was born and raised in the city of Norfolk.
Was it 33 years ago today?
It was 33 years ago today, exactly.
Congratulations. That's big.
Thank you.
Big.
Now, as a member of the community, I always felt that I was a part of the community. I respected the person that I dealt with, whether or not I was arresting them, whether or not they were going through a mental health crisis. They were part of my community. These were the same people I would see if I went to the store. These were the same people I would see if I went to church. These were the same people I would see if I went for a job. You have to have that connection to the community. That's the first thing that you have to have. And in a city the size of Baltimore, or the size of Washington, D.C., even Norfolk, Virginia, and Newport News, Virginia, these are cities with several hundred thousands of people. And out of that, there are people in those communities that are willing to serve the communities. That's the first point that we have to do. We have to locate those folks. And it's not about the color of the officer. Currently, I'm in charge of professional standards for my agency. We see African American officers engaged in misconduct, just like we see white officers that are engaged in misconduct. It's about the connection to the community. That's the most important thing. And if we defund the police department, and if it's defunding as in we're taking away a bunch of money, the first thing that suffers is personnel. Personnel costs will make up the majority of any police budget. And when people talk about the militarization of police departments, it has to start with who we hire. Not that a person who has a military background is a bad hire, but once they join the police department, it becomes important to make sure that these folks know that they are not in combat anymore. They cannot use the terminology, the attitude that a soldier would use in Afghanistan or in Iraq. Because in Afghanistan and Iraq, they have no idea of who the enemy is. Their job is to get back to the base at the end of the day. Their job is to make sure that everybody with them gets back at the end of the day. Police department, police officer has a different job. Their job is to protect and serve the community. Yes, it's my duty to make sure my partner goes home and I go home, but that's not the number one duty. The number one duty is to protect and to serve that community, and you have to have a connection to that community. So I would tell the governor that we have to invest from this point forward, because it's going to be a long haul. We didn't get into this problem overnight. And as I said, I started 33 years ago, and there were major problems then in policing in this country, just like there are major problems now with policing in this country. So, like I said, the first thing I would have to do is tell the governor, we have to set up a program where we're going to bring in the best and the brightest into the profession. And we're going to make sure that they begin their career as professionals. We need to change policing from a vocation to a profession. And that will be my number one thing that I would say that we have to do as far as police funding.
I think that's outstanding, without question. And I think that'd be something the governor would be well advised to take you up on, And I have to say this, and before I get back to Sergeant Russell, I do want to get back to Anthony Fugette, the president of the Baltimore County branch NAACP. And what I want to ask you is just about dealing with, let's take this back to members of the community. We know officers are out there, they're walking the beat, they have a difficult job. But we also know that many people of color in communities are not feeling a sense of safety with officers out there, are not feeling a sense of security, are not feeling a sense of respect, as we addressed before. And your, really stewardship of the NAACP, what is the biggest concern, gripes, issues that you're approached with by people every day that you speak to that are concerned about this issue of reform? And what, if anything, do we need to do about that biggest concern that people express to you so that we can get people less concerned about it and perhaps develop solutions to those problems?
Right. That's a very interesting question. First of all, let me say that there's no such thing in Baltimore County as walking the beat. As all police officers now are traveling around in cars, so that they are truly disconnected from the community, and you don't really have the touch and feel and look of the police department. But what we've been attempting to do is to work to have the department reach out, if you would, to the community and community events where they would sit down and the community would have an opportunity to speak. And I serve on a work group that looks at those types of issues. And it got started based on African Americans were disproportionately stopped for traffic stops. So that either says that they're looking for us or we're really bad drivers. And I would contend that that's not the case. The other thing I think that needs to happen is that the department should reflect the community that it serves. I saw a situation where elderly woman was forced to the ground in Baltimore County by a police officer. And they were trying to get to this young lady. And as soon as an African-American officer showed up on the scene, the lady gave up without anything at all, because she saw somebody that looked like her and she responded to it. So it's they don't look like us, they don't treat us. And what we want to make sure happens is that if a situation occurs, that the outcome would be the same if the person were white or African American, that you would have the same outcome. But all too often, the white person comes away and lives to see another day, but the African American's lost his life. So that's the thing that we have to deal with. But primarily it's traffic stops and really trying to find ways to touch and feel officers that doesn't exist today.
I'm just so sorry to hear that. And as I turn back to Sergeant Anthony Russell on that issue, I am sorry to hear that you don't have the quote unquote walking the beat, because I think that's where you get context, flavor, the connection, the dialogue, the understanding, the discussion between officers and members of the community. But what do we say, Sergeant Russell? What do we say to our younger officers who potentially are learning the job, who are more impressionable, who potentially can go out and make a difference? Every officer, right? No matter whether they started yesterday or they've been on the job for 33 years, effective today, or have served, as David Hughes has, for 33 years effective today. Every officer can make a difference. But I guess, what do you say to that younger officer who's going out eager into communities, and your job starts now? How do you change the narrative with respect to how police are viewed by communities? How do you change the narrative with respect to the level of trust that communities think police have for them, and vice versa? What do you tell that young officer?
Well, every officer has an opportunity to change that narrative based on how they interact with that community member. So if you are a person who is hoarding these preconceived issues, then that may come out in that interaction, but you can change that. Even if that community member had a bad encounter with the officer before you, now they're having an encounter with you. And I hate to go back to it, but it goes right back to the original word, which is respect. I respect you as a human being. Okay, I'm going to interact with you because I'm no better than you. And that might be the underlying issue in policing. We have developed the mentality of us versus them. And that 100% has to change. And I don't know if it's because of race or socioeconomic status, but at the end of the day, that's what's there. And we have to work just as hard as we work to train people in the academy based on their tactics. We have to work just as hard to get people to understand that the people that you encounter 100% rely on you to be a change agent. And they expect you to make a difference in their lives for the good. So what we've seen recently is the police are making a difference in people's lives, specifically people, specifically minorities or underrepresented people for the bad. So every officer has that opportunity, but there is a disconnect between what happens in the academy and what happens in the station house. And we have to deal firsthand with the mentality inside of the station house. That is ground zero for making sure that all those good things that people learn in the academy, all those good lessons, all that training is transferred onto the street, and it is not negatively affected by what happens in the station house, by the environment inside the station house. So chiefs, executives, they all have to get together and try to diagnose this situation. But first of all, they have to talk to people. You can't diagnose a situation without talking to people. You can't go to the doctor. First question the doctor's going to ask you is, okay, what's wrong? Why are you here today? And if they are diagnosing you, one of my friends says this all the time, if they are diagnosing you without asking you questions, then they're not really helping you. So as a profession, we have to get to the point where we are asking the stakeholders, which is the public, how can you help us understand you? We have to have meetings with the youth. We have to have meetings with minority youth specifically to ask of the youth, what did we do that you did not like? And how can we change it? We have to explain to the youth the difference between I'm detaining you from I'm arresting you. You know, those things are very important. And if the school system isn't teaching it, we have to be the ones who fill in that gap and teach that, because a lot of the negative encounters we have basically occur because of a lack of understanding of what's going on. So we as police have to reach out and ask those important questions. How can you help us understand what we are doing that is not right? And until we get to that point, we're not going to change this. But back to your first question, every young officer can change this and can make a difference.
Can I respond to that?
Of course, please do, David. You.
I would like to agree, first of all, with Mr. Russell, but I'd also like to point out that I don't think that we do enough in the academy.
Oh, we definitely don't.
I think that in the academy, there are things that we do that sabotage officers down the road. There are things that are taught. We're taught how to arrest someone. We're taught defensive tactics. We're taught how to shoot. We are taught the legal reasons, what's legally permissible to do. But we're not taught to ask the question, is it necessary? Anytime you are faced with a choice of the use of force, whether it's in the academy, whether it's in in-service training, or any type of scenario, there is always a critique that goes down the lines of whether or not it was legal. Did it fall within the guidelines of this court case, whether it's Tennessee versus Garner, that's always there, but there's no mention of whether or not it was necessary. Through the years, I've found that I can tell you many occasions I could have legally used force, and I could just off the top of my head tell you 4 or 5 where I could have legally used deadly force, and I did not because I didn't feel it was necessary. So we have to teach young officers, number one, they have to be able to figure out, based on the circumstances, is this a necessity? Yes, it may be legal, but do I necessarily have to do this? Are there other options? Secondly, there are things that we do to sabotage that. In training, we hear phrases all the time. I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I've heard the phrase, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. Those are things that we are putting into the minds of the recruits, and they remember that. So when they get out and it comes down to, oh, here's an opportunity for deadly force, well, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. So what choice are they going to make? We've just sabotaged them. It all comes back to a mindset. And that's the mindset that they are coming to work, regardless of where they live. They walk out the door, they put on a ballistic vest, they put on a uniform, they put on a badge, they get in their car and they drive. And when they drive out on patrol. And the folks that they're seeing, they don't know whether or not they're good, upstanding citizens. They don't know whether they are someone who has just committed a crime. They don't know if it's someone who hates the police. So therefore, they react that way. And so when they stop somebody, when they deal with somebody, they deal with it from the standpoint of, what is it that I need to do legally? Well, legally, this is what I'm going to tell you to do. And when I tell you to put your hands behind your back and I'm going to arrest you, that's what I expect you to do. When you don't comply immediately, legally, I have the authority to use force. So that's what I'm going to do. But we haven't taught them that the most important thing they have is this, their mouth. They have to take the steps to prevent escalation. De-escalation is too late. We have to teach them how to prevent escalation. And once we do that, then you're on the way to a better career for that officer. They will perform better.
Can I
Can I
respond to
just
that?
please just say one thing with Mr. Hughes said? He is so right. And I often tell my prosecutors, and I hope that commanders and chiefs tell their police officers that the most powerful tool you have isn't the power to arrest, it's not the power to prosecute, it is the power of discretion. You decide how you're going to interact with that person. We decide in our office whether or not we're going to prosecute a case, what charges we're going to move forward with, whether or not we are going to offer a plea or offer an opportunity for someone to have their case either null pros or what's called steaded, which is we put it on a docket, and if they don't get into any more trouble, then we won't prosecute them for that offense. But there's a wide range of discretion that my prosecutors are given. And when they opt not to move forward, when they opt to do something other than seek a conviction because they believe that the person deserves a second chance, or there is a program or diversion opportunity for that person, I encourage that just as much as I encourage them when I think that prosecution is the appropriate answer to resolve a certain matter. But similarly, police have the same level, if not even more discretion out on the street every single day. They can determine whether or not they're going to stop someone, whether or not that stop will end in arrest, how they approach the person. He's absolutely right. The approach is everything. And why the approach is so important is even if you arrest someone, if you approach them in the wrong way, if you violate their rights, their constitutional rights, their Fourth Amendment rights, then we, the prosecutor's office, will use their discretion not to prosecute those cases because we have to protect individuals' constitutional rights. So every single time there's an interaction with an officer, to me, there's an opportunity to make a difference. There's an opportunity oftentimes to resolve the incident without an arrest. And the reality is we want people to comply with the law. We want them to observe and respect the law. We don't necessarily have to arrest for every incident. Most of the issues that we see with police, especially when you look at the use of force incidents that have made national and international news, it's typically a misdemeanor offense, where police have ultimate discretion. They don't have to act for a misdemeanor offense. And so I think that power of discretion has to be taught. Emotional intelligence is extremely important. That should be celebrated on police departments. When officers decide that instead of arresting someone, they're going to connect them with a service from the community, command staff should celebrate that officer, because guess what? That person will probably never commit another offense. But that person who gets arrested, that person who may face prosecution, oftentimes goes back out and commits the same offense because no one has meaningfully intervened in their lives. So I think the power of discretion is so important. I think we could talk about discretion for like a year because we just talk about that issue of discretion. It is so powerful, so important, and I think could change the trajectory of how we police and how we prosecute if we use our discretion more effectively.
Without question, Anthony Russell.
Yes, and it goes back to the original point that I made about there is a disconnect between what happens at the academy, and I agree with Major Hughes. I think it's Major, but I know the last name is Hughes. I agree with Major Hughes that yes, the academy could definitely do more. They could do more, but that disconnect between the academy and the station house, where it appears that based on the mindset of maybe the chiefs, some police departments are taking that mindset of we are going to enforce crime, or we're going to deal with crime, and we're going to be stat driven. And when you are a stat driven police department based on arrests and tickets, then that changes everything. So oftentimes the officer who chooses to use that discretion and say, you know what, I'm gonna try another method. I'm not going to make that arrest. They get back to the station house, and oftentimes they're ridiculed or even chastised for not making the arrest. So again, it goes back to what happens between the academy and the station house. What are the supervisors saying they should do? And most of the time, you're not getting an accolade for the discretion that you use for not making the arrest, which is a good thing. That should be applauded that you didn't do that. But when you get to the station house, it is so often not applauded. And on top of that, when you are put in for awards, most of the awards are coming because you made the arrest. They're coming because you led the station in tickets. Your stats were off the charts, and we are ignoring those other methods that good police officers use on the other side of policing. Because the other side of policing is problem solving. It's not just about writing tickets and making arrests. So that's the mindset or the paradigm shift that has to occur, especially now, so that we can get away from an arrest stat-driven profession or vocation. Because right now we're not looked at as a profession. We can get away from that and also deal with the fact that, you know what, the community needs help. And we need a partnership with the community, not us being better than them. We need to be partners with the community and understand that we can solve this problem or this issue without making an arrest, without writing the ticket. A warning serves the same thing. You know, the person got stopped, they went through the situation, you wrote them a warning. You write somebody a ticket, they ride away mad or not happy about what happened. And you have other means or other methods to deal with that. So again, but when you get back to the station, supervisors want stats. That's an issue. Politicians want crime. How do they deal with crime? I'm going to fight crime. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. That trickles down all the way to the station house. So that green officer who gets out of the academy and is trying to make a difference walks into this wall of the environment inside the station house. And because you're the green officer, you don't know how to deal with that. And you either become a change in that environment or that environment changes you.
So well stated. So I know we're an hour and 15 minutes in. I just want to address two other issues. So grateful all of you for your time, for your expertise, and everything that you bring. I guess the two issues I'd want to address are really one, I'm going to go around, I'm going to ask everyone, if you literally were in charge, whether it be you were the governor, the head of the legislature, or there was some legislative reform that you could institute today and you had the authority to do it, I'm going to ask all of you what that is. But before we get to that, as you think about it, I want to address something that's very, very important, and that is the state of our African-American young men today and their encounters with the police. And certainly, not that our African-American women are certainly held harmless from this, that's an issue too. But we see all the time and way too often, whether it's an issue that results in death, where I could give you a litany of names, you all know the names all too familiar, where it's not death, but it's just, Americans being treated badly. I guess what I would want to know from all of you before we get to the next question, you have the magic wand, you're in charge, you institute the legislative reform. But I guess what I want to know from everyone, right? What do we say? What do we say to our African-American men, our young men, right? I have a son just graduated from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We have these discussions. And I hope, that I've done the right job, of course, with my wife, raising him, doing what I have to do. But I often say three things to him, right? The one thing I say is, listen, as you go through life, I want you to treat everyone with courtesy and respect. I don't care whether it's the person who shines your shoes or brings you coffee or signs your paycheck and is the CEO. Everyone is entitled to respect, to decency, to empathy. And so no matter what, you treat people the same. The second thing, of course, is an understanding that although you treat people the same, people may not treat you the same. And don't let that, force you to become bitter or anything else. Just recognize and understand that some people are different. Let them be different. You be who you are. But as it relates to policing, I'm often telling my stuff, and listen, fly now, grieve later. So that we can see you alive, right? There are attorneys who are out there, like me and other people, who have your back in a courtroom. But when you're on the streets, it's the officers. Give them their deference. Do what you need to do. Come home safely. But I guess to a broader issue that I'm asking all of you is, what do we say to our young people of color to give them that confidence, to give them the knowledge and understanding that it could be better, it will be better. People are not marching in vain. People are marching because it's time to make a difference. People are marching because, right, the time is now that we can institute proper and effective reform. But that reform in large measure is directed to our young African-American men. And so what do we say to them? And we'll start with our state's attorney on this issue. Aisha, love your... The bottom line is, I'm sure this is something so important to you, right? And so important that you come across. And so, to our state attorney, Aisha Braveboy, again, what do you tell these African-American young men that makes them know and understand that tomorrow's a better day?
I think it simply says, but, Black Lives Matter. Your life matters. You are important to me. And I think as state's attorney, when I tell a young Black man or a young Hispanic man or any young person that you matter to me, your future matters to me, that means a lot to them. And I'll give you one quick example. Recently, I've instituted a policy where I'm assisting juvenile lifers to get second chances. I stood across from a young Black man. He's young because he's about my age, maybe a year older, but he's been in jail he was in jail for
That makes him very young.
But he was in jail for 29 years. He committed a crime at 16 or 17. I think he ended up going to jail. But anyway, and I had never met him personally, but I had read all of his progress that he made while he was in jail, or really in prison, actually. And I said to him, I believe in you. And I said to the judge, my office stands behind giving him a second chance. Look in his eyes when I said that was, I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. But just knowing that someone believes in you, someone is willing to risk. I mean, that's a risk for me. We had never done that. Number one in the history of the state, certainly not in our courthouse, had we proactively as a state's attorney's office asked the court to resentence a juvenile lifer. And I think that what he saw was that it wasn't about him. I don't know him personally, but it's about the fact that people do believe in Black men, that we don't all look at them as predators. And when they make mistakes, that we believe they're whole human beings and that there is redemption, that there is rehabilitation, and to know that someone in a position like mine that will take a risk, take sacrifice for them, I think is so important. So letting them know that we see them, we love them, we care about them, and we believe in them, and their life matters to us.
God bless you. And turning to you, Major Katie Goodwin, on the same issue about our young African-American men.
I can tell you the biggest advantage that I've seen are having forums like this. I've sat on many forums that are just with the youth and the juveniles, and having those open, candid, honest conversations. Some of the toughest questions I've ever been asked have come from juveniles because they're brutally honest and they'll ask exactly what's on their mind. And I think the more you start talking to each other and listening, not just talking, but actually listening to one another, and you start seeing it from their perspective, just like they start seeing it from a law enforcement officer's perspective when they ask us, why is this so important that you have to see our hands? Why do you freak out when our hands are in our pockets? Because hands kill. So if I can see your hands, I know you're not going to get a gun. I know you're not going to be able to hurt me. So that's why it's so important to us. But when you start answering, I think we're in that why generation. They want to know why to so many things. And we're all in that generation that we were told, when you were told to do something, you did it. But I think we now have to slow down as police officers and explain a lot more, especially to the juveniles and the youth. And I always tell them there's a time and place for everything to ask questions. And sometimes in the heat of it, when there's a lot of chaos, that might not be the best time to ask a police officer, why are they getting stopped? There's always going to be time for that. But I think the key with young, with the juveniles, like I've said before, they've got to see our police officers in a different light. They can't see us just going in their neighborhoods and arresting them. And we've got to continue the dialogue. They're important. They're our future. We've got to engage them. We have got to make them part of the solution to the problems and listen to them because they have really good ideas. And I think when you create that dialogue, it's going to start creating relationships, which breeds into trust.
Without question, so well stated. And so coming back to you, and I'll ask you, Antonio Puget, our NAACP president there, or, just in terms of looking and speaking to our youth, what is it that we let them know? What do we say, Anthony?
I think that what's been said before is very important in nurturing and talking to our youth. But it's also like, remember we had civics, and how the world works and how the community works and how power happens in a community. I think that what happened with the marches that have been going on and the protests that have been going on is that young folks have awakened, okay, and they started something. And I think that now is the time where we have to sit down and talk to these young folks and translate it to voting, to getting to the polls, to getting to vote people in who support what they would like to see happen in the community, because it's all connected and it's tied together. So it's I think that the awakening has happened, and now it's just funneling it in the right direction for positive change and good. And I think that educating them on voting, those types of things are very, very, very important. And getting out the vote in the next election.
And I'm sure John Lewis, may he rest in peace, and thank him for all he's done, would agree with you wholeheartedly on the voting issue. And so, Sergeant Anthony Russell, let me transition to you in terms of giving youth and our young Black men, just some hope, some level of understanding, some knowledge that it's going to be better, that tomorrow's a better day. How do we do it?
Well, I think first, in order to create a dialogue, we have to admit that we have gotten this wrong. We have to wholeheartedly admit that we've gotten it wrong. When you look at incarceration rates, when you look at suspension rates in schools, when you look at even on a different level, financial literacy and things like that all affect what's going on. Job training, we have to admit that we got this wrong. And once we admit that and then solicit the assistance, the help, and really create a meaningful partnership to say, look, we got this wrong. We need your assistance to get this right. We need your assistance to get this back on track. So again, it goes back to the original word, respect. That shows a level of respect. It shows a level of, you know what, I'm going to respect you so much that I'm going to ask you, what could I do to make this better? And again, I'm sure we're going to get a whole lot of it. Just like the major mentioned earlier, why do you need to see my hands? Something as small as that in the eyes of police is large in the eyes of a young person. Why are you stopping? So, we need to start with educating, but also it ultimately starts with letting people know that we respect you. We got this wrong. We want to fix it. And without you, we can't fix it. Without you, we will repeat the same errors over and over again. So it starts there. And that creates a better collaboration between us and the community. And it allows young people to understand where we are. We understand where they are. And ultimately, there's growth on both sides. Growth on both sides. That's what we need.
And that's so important. And last, certainly but not least, Major David Hughes, Newport News, Virginia Sheriff's Office. I asked you before we do the round robin, and essentially closing it out of all of you having a magic wand. What is the message that needs to be to our young Black men that tomorrow's a better day?
Well, I think we have to make sure that they know that there is hope. So many times you have folks that just don't have a hope, don't have any hope for the future. They don't see a future for themselves. They don't see any other thing out there. And then you come along and they have to deal with police officers, other members of government. And what they do is they look at it and they go, that's just the government and they don't care about me. And I just need to go out here and make my way. We have to show them that there's hope. That's first of all. Secondly, like Mr. Russell said, we have to be willing to say we were wrong. None of the problems that we face as far as crime and drugs and mental health, none of those problems can be locked away. We can't arrest our way out of the problem. We have to find viable solutions, and those solutions include involving the young folks of today, and that's men and women. And so we have to tell them that things can get better. Just like I mentioned, my first night on the police department, I didn't know I was going to be here 33 years later. During the times when I was faced with racism internally in the police department, I didn't know I was going to be here. So you have to let them know that there's a way beyond that. There is a way to deal with it. There's a way to move on from it. And things do get better. And you have to let them know what they have to do to make things better. And we as a profession have to say what we are willing to do on our part to make things better.
Amen to that. And so in conclusion, I want to involve the Reverend in this. We all have our magic wands out, and there are reforms that we can institute, and we can do it tonight. You know, what would the reform be? The one reform, and I just want to go around and ask everyone that you would have to be instituted tonight. You have the authority where you're now a king, a queen. You know, you've met with your legislature, you've gotten the role, boom, you can do it. And so I'll start with you. I'll go to our state's attorney, Ms. Brave Boy. What would you do?
Well, I'm hopeful that we actually can do this next year in Annapolis. And so for those of you who are here from Maryland, I hope that you can join me. I really believe we need to create an emerging adult justice system here, similar to our juvenile justice system. Because what I have seen is the majority of the young people, or the people who are committing the most serious and violent offenses, are those aged about 18 to about 24 to 26. If we can meaningfully intervene in their lives and create a more restorative system of justice for that age group, I believe that our crime rates would drop dramatically, and mass incarceration, our incarceration rates will drop dramatically. So creating that emerging adult system of justice, we're looking at maybe even having a conference, a workshop on that in the fall. So for those who are here from Maryland or beyond, you know, I hope that you guys can join me, but creating that system of justice that's more restorative for that age group is very critically important.
Yeah, I think it really is. And even if you're not in Maryland, I think things that make sense have the ability to transcend and to go throughout the country. And so continue to fight that fight, and you do it so well. And so hopefully that's a reform that does get instituted and many people will benefit as a result. And so transitioning to you, I would just like to ask our commander, Major Katie Goodwin, again, you have the one reform. What can we do right now that we can implement to change the world?
I think it would really be looking at President Obama's Task Force 21st Century Policing. They made a lot of great suggestions, and if they really wanted to decrease police violence, these things cost a lot of money, but it's very simple. Body-worn cameras, prioritizing de-escalation, implicit bias training, the early intervention, and the citizen review board all came out of President Obama's 21st Century Policing. If they implemented those things, which you know cost a lot of money, it takes a lot of resources, but you will truly see a decrease in police violence.
Yeah, amen to that. And that's certainly what we need to see. And just moving right down the line, I'll go to you, David Hughes. Tell us, Major, what would you do?
Well, I think I would deal with the foundation of police officers, the folks that we're hiring. I would start out, I would change the hiring requirements. They would actually get a little bit tougher. I would make sure that any new officer at least have the foundation of a 4-year college degree. Now, that's not going to be a magic wand and wipe out any problems that they have, but what it will do is it will give them a foundation. It will give them an idea of how to start, how to deal with people on a psychological level, how to deal with people of different cultures. And I would make sure that that degree would be in something that's related to policing, you know, criminal justice, sociology, psychology, a 4-year degree in that. And then, in addition to that, extend the academy time. The amount of time and effort that we put into preparing a person to go out on the street and have the authority to take somebody's life, their liberty, their property, just based on their observation, the amount of time that we spend preparing them is not enough. We need to invest in that up front. Now, like you said, it may cost some money, but that would be the one thing I would do, to give them a solid foundation so that when they do come into contact with members of the community, that they're well educated and well trained.
Amen to that. Sergeant Anthony Russell, President Bugard.
Well, kind of piggybacking on what Major Hughes said, I've always been someone who's pushed implicit association testing prior to people coming on the job, so that we are testing for bias And also, after people get on the job, we are periodically testing for bias and also having psychological exams. In most settings, we only get one psychological exam, barring any other issues that occur. And we may be missing a lot of things that go on in a police career that go undetected, but may manifest itself in some of these calls that are occurring. So the police may have underlying issues that need to be dealt with, but without having these periodic psychological exams, they go undetected. So I think those two things are important. And I also think we should start a study on how the development of the human brain at the age of 21 is compared to how it affects policing at the age of 25. So I do think that being 21 may be too young to be a police officer based on scientific studies that say the human brain is not fully developed. And we are expecting people who are 21 to basically solve issues that they have never dealt with ever in life. And they have no clue on how to solve outside of the training they may have received in the academy. So I think those three things are things that we should look at to start the reform of how we now hire and do policing.
Absolutely, Sergeant. And certainly, last but not least, before we get to our Reverend, I'll get to you, Mr. Anthony Puget, President of Baltimore County Grand NAACP. What's your report?
You know, the thing that I would like to see is a relationship with the community. And it was mentioned earlier, but I think that a civilian or citizen review board would be very, very, very essential in making sure that the community had a partnership with the police department. And it would be an organization that had teeth, that could be responsible for the accountability, if you would, and the responsibilities for the police that are involved, so that actions would be transparent. Because I believe at the end of the day, if people know that they're going to be held accountable and responsible, then maybe they'll do the right thing, because they know that there's going to be a price to be paid if they don't. So having that civilian review board with some teeth would be something that I would like to see in Baltimore County.
Amen to that. And Reverend, if we could just transition to end with you, coming full circle, I think everyone recognizes and understands and has mentioned, the role of the clergy, the significance of the clergy in the community. Certainly you spoke the best of all about that issue. What's the reform we need to see to turn this thing around? You brought us all together. Now you keep us all safe, make things better, start at every level in every state, in every municipality, in every jurisdiction throughout this country. What do we have to do to move this ball, to move this dialogue, and more importantly, to make meaningful, systemic, and important reforms moving forward, Reverend?
Well, there are several things. The first thing I would say is those persons who are at the top, who are the decision makers, have to be open to dialogue, even if the dialogue is uncomfortable for you. And the reason I say that, just recently I reached out to our top cop here in Baltimore County, submitted a letter of request to have a face-to-face meeting. I have yet to have that meeting. I did get a response from the chief of staff stating that she could not meet within the time frame that I set. And so I replied to him, so when will she be available? That was over 10 days ago, and I heard crickets. So when the top people that's in charge don't feel that it's worthy of listening to members of the community, it sends a message that what we have to say is not important. It sends a message clear. You can't tell me one thing and show me something else. There has to be, as it's already been stated, communication. When I teach premarital sessions, I teach these couples There are many keys to a successful marriage, but there are two important keys. Those two are communication and understanding. You'll never learn to understand one another if you never learn to communicate. And if you don't communicate, you'll never understand. We have to have dialogue. That's why we've called this forum and invited folk from both sides, because you have to have dialogue. And those persons who are in charge at the top need to be open to community dialogue. They need to be open. It is very important. I would also say that in that training process, in restructuring the training, bring in a clergy member, someone that's not an officer, someone that's from the community, and let them have dialogue with that candidate or with that cadet and share with them what the community expects from them, but then also have them the opportunity where they can ask questions of them. See, many people have preconceived notions about who we are based on how we look, based on how we dress, based on what we drive. They have preconceived notions. But I think it was, who was it? India Arie says, "I'm not my hair." Is that the song years ago?
Yeah.
Don't judge me by my hair. Don't judge me by the color of my skin. Don't judge me by the clothes that I wear. Even if my pants, and not me per se, is hanging off my posterior and my shoes are untied, don't judge me by that. You can have some real interesting conversations when you have dialogue with individuals. One of the interesting things that just happened on Thursday of this week, on our talk show, we invited young folk. We started a show and it's entitled Rising Stars. We had young folk on the show just talking, chit-chatting about whatever they wanted to talk about, just basic stuff. Not only that, we are planning a Town Hall 3 in September that will be nothing but young people on the panel. We can't just have this conversation with police officers and NAACP and clergy and attorneys. Listen, we have to listen to the young people. Now, be careful, be ready for what they're going to say. You know, we gotta run it through a filter, and sometimes we may have to run it through 3 or 4 filters. You know, but listen, we've got to listen to them. After all, they are no longer the future of tomorrow. They are today. These are the individuals that's going to be running for elected office in this next election. These are the individuals that's going to be sitting across from State's Attorney Brayboard, pleading a case. These are the individuals that's going to be sitting in front of you, Attorney Jackson, not as a defendant, but asking, how can I be a part of your firm? These are the ones. These are the ones. And so we have to have an open mind. We have to at least agree to disagree. I would challenge every one of you all that are leaders that have some authority. If you do not have a clergy person that you can reach out to talk to and invite to be a part of certain meetings and certain things that you feel would help, listen, find one, get one, because you are doing yourself a disjustice. They could bridge the gap that you've been trying to work. Some things you can't legislate. Some things you can't throw enough money at. You've got to have somebody that can speak to the issues and get folks to understand, well, you know, really what you did, really, you know that wasn't right. Then they go, well, Rev, yeah, Rev, you got me, Rev, you got me, yeah, you're right. But listen, a person in blue is not going to get that response. A state's attorney's not going to get that response because all they see is somebody's out to get me and I'm about to lose my freedom. Even an animal, when it's caged, will fight. And what we have to learn to do is like what Sergeant Russell said or brought up, or I think it was maybe it was Major Hughes. If we're talking about it, it's too late. A good friend of mine says, if you find yourself having to explain yourself, you already lost the battle. Whatever you say something, it ought to be clear and concise. There should be no doubt when you say no that you mean no. Even a child, a toddler, when you tell them no, you have to mean no. But then there's a way to say no and get the same results. We talked about respect. I respect each of you all. I value you. That's why you're here. Because I believe that you have something going for you other than your title. You have something that is a key element that holds the fiber of our community together. And it's up to you to push the envelope with your higher up people. You have to say to them, listen, no, I think the way we're going about this is wrong. We need to stop, hit the refresh button, maybe bring in some different ideas from some different people, and let's rework this thing. We can do a better job. We can be more efficient. We can become better effective. But we can't isolate those who have valuable input. We can't discard those just because we may not like what they're going to say. We go to a doctor. We pay money for the doctor to diagnose our case. The doctor writes us a prescription. We go to the pharmacy and get it filled, bring it home, and won't take it. Because we feel that we know what's best for us. We have to have conversation. We have to have understanding. We have to involve members of the community. I'm all for a civilian review board. I'm all for it. There needs to be some oversight. It's hard for a police department to police itself. How do you police yourself? You already know the laws. You already know the loopholes. You already know them. So then you teach your people what to say. What does everybody say? I was in fear of my life. That's the first thing they say. How are you in fear of your life when you shoot somebody in the back that's running away from you? Really? And this is not new. This has been going on. We're just now seeing it because of technology. Because of technology. But we can do better. We can bring about change. We can bring about effective reform. We can save people's lives. And what I've been telling folks is, listen, what we're doing today, we're really not doing it so much for ourselves. We're doing it for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, our descendants. The history books are going to be written. And when our descendants read the history books, you know the question that they're going to ask? The same question that people today are asking about their foreparents that were slave owners. How could they have done that to these people? That's going to be the question. When all of our names are listed in the history books of having town halls and having meetings and being on the side of right and wrong, our descendants are going to ask the question, how could my foreparents have done that? How could they not have stood up for justice? How could they not have stood up for reform? That's going to be the question. The old saying said, to be or not to be. That, my friends, is the question. And so, brother moderator, is it back to me, or are you still moderating?
Yeah, I actually have another duty at CNN that I have to report to Chris Cuomo momentarily. But I will say to you that I am very grateful. Let me just say this to you, Reverend Edward N. Mason Jr. Your leadership is outstanding on this and so many other issues. And I think that you can't get to the issue of a resolution of a problem until you really bring good minds together to see what those resolutions could be. And so to identify issues and problems and to look to see how we deal with them moving forward. You mentioned bringing young people and saying, hey, be careful. You don't know what they're going to say. But you know what? We got to be ready for what they have to say, because at the end of the day, this so much has to do with them, and it has to do with our future. And to your point, we can do better and we will do better. But it starts with doing better, because we have visionaries like you who have the foresight to bring, community leaders together, like Aisha Braveboy, the state's attorney, Prince George's County in Maryland, second to none in terms of, reform she's looking to institute, an understanding of the community, et cetera. Major David Hughes, you heard him, right? Newport News, Virginia Sheriff's Office, just having a knowledge and an understanding, and how unbelievable that today, of all days, I mean, is it karma? Is it fate? Is it what have you? But it would be his 33rd year on the job. Just so amazing. And what are we discussing? Issues of reform. Hats off to you, sir, for all you do, for all you've done, for all you were yet to do. Major Katie Goodwin, and just the approach that she has with regard to her philosophy. Again, the platinum standard, right, of treating people with respect and treating them better even than they think that you could or should treat them. And so if every officer were to potentially subscribe to that standard, boy, what a better place we would be in. Sergeant Anthony Russell, and all you bring to the table as the president of the Blue Guardians, and the resolutions that you have, the foresight that you have in addressing this issue. Just thankful to have you. And of course, we have Anthony Fugette, the president of the Baltimore County Branch NAACP, just in dealing with communities and standing for communities and representing communities, and just in being such a great part of the community. And so I thank you, and I thank all of you for allowing me the opportunity to be with you and to moderate this esteemed panel with such distinguished people. And I'm grateful, and I'm hopeful that the future will bring about reform, will bring about change, and will make us in a place where I think all people of color, will be treated with the equality that they deserve, and what Martin Luther King Jr. before his time really believed that we should be. And so thank you again for this evening, and thank you for all you bring to the issue of justice and the issue of reform.
Let me say thank you to each of you all. You have been outstanding. This has been a superb panel that has brought information, insight, relevancy to the issues of today. Each of you know how to reach me. I am available to you for whatever I can assist you with. Attorney Jackson, please tell Chris to give me a call. I watch him almost every night, and I'll be watching you tonight.
Watching tonight, yeah.
I'll be watching tonight. Everybody be blessed. To all of our listeners, Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so there you have it. That is a rebroadcast of our town hall that was held on this past Monday. I know that it was a little lengthy, but I thought that it was worthwhile for us to share. I did get quite a few comments from persons that perhaps did not see it, thought that it was worthwhile. I want to thank you. As we mentioned, in September, actually the third Sunday in September, I think it's September the 20th at 6 p.m., we will be hosting Town Hall 3 that will be filled with a panel of young people, both male and female. And so I encourage you to be a part of that. If you have some bright and outstanding young people, these are going to be persons that are late teens up to, I think, 29 that will be sharing on our panel. And so if you have someone, then drop us an email and let us know, and perhaps maybe we can get them in. Well, it's been a good evening, and I trust that you have enjoyed the broadcast. Once again, Reverend Edward N. Mason, your host of Let's Talk About It. Good night and have a great evening.